World Level 9 being introduced to Genshin Impact has changed how many boss drops we get, and we now have plenty of new craftables in the game, 3 of which were free handouts, and we have plenty of new domains to potentially farm, not to mention having all of this on top of maintaining our usual weekly bosses and maintaining a steady flow of character-based resources, such as XP and Mora. Today, I'm here to discuss the value of each of these things and how to go about farming in the most efficient way, while also providing a few tips along the way to help you get the most bang for your resin. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. With World Level 9 active, we now have the potential to land up to 4 boss drops per battle, so this changes the potential resin cost that it takes in order to obtain the full amount of 46 boss drops in order to ascend the character to stage 1, right all the way up to their final stage. Let's do a new breakdown of how much resin it costs in order to max out a character with the World Level 9 boss drop rates being taken into account. Just so that we're on the same page, know that World Level 9 guarantees 3 boss drops while offering a small chance to land 4. First, I will assume worst case scenario luck with 3 boss drops each. Then I will assume the best case scenario with 4 boss drops each. Please keep in mind that that'd be an extremely rare occurrence. From there, we can estimate the average amount of resin required to fully ascend the character from stage 1 all the way up to their final stage. I'll then also evaluate how many full days of resin investment it would require to ascend the character fully in this way. Okay, so 40 resin equals 3 boss drops. 200 resin would then equal 15, because 3 boss drops times 5 runs. So then 600 resin brings us up to 45 drops. Then you'd have to add 1 more run, so that you could reach beyond 46. That's 640 resin, and if we divide that by 60 to find out the cost in fragiles, that's 11. So in the absolute worst case scenario, assuming World Level 9 is unlocked, you're spending 640 resin to max a character's ascension stages out. Let's assume the best case scenario now, where 40 resin gives you 4 boss drops a pop. 200 resin spent would be 20 drops, since 4 times 5 runs is 20, so 400 resin would give you 40 drops. Add 2 more runs onto that to reach beyond 46, and that's 480 resin. Divide that by 60 to get the cost in fragiles, and that's 8 fragiles required if we're starting from scratch. This is infinitely more efficient than how it was before. With that being considered, if we were to mix them up, I would assume that the average cost would be in between 540 to 600 resin to completely max out a character. This is a random estimate that turns more in your favor the more 4s that you get, but even if you only get 3s, it's so much better than before. Your worst case before with World Level 8 was 2 boss drops every 40, and that'd be 10 boss drops since 2 times 5 is 10 drops. That's 800 resin for 40, and then 920 if we account for the 3 extra runs that you'd have to do. That has a fragile cost of 16. Mixing it up with 3s to average it out would only reduce it down to 700 to 800, which is still far above the total worst case at World Level 9, which would be 640. And you will definitely get a few 4s during your farming, so your average at World Level 8 is on the whole a lot worse than your average at World Level 9. This is a big upgrade. Cool and epic, sure, but what if you have a bunch of other units to maintain, or have a long list of artifacts and resources that you still need farmed for your characters? How can you be efficient with this? Simple. We have 2 Natlan characters out as of now, Mualani and Kachina. Mualani is a DPS, and an HP scaling one at that, so she seriously benefits from the levels. So sadly, yes, you do want to collect all 46 boss drops for her, and there isn't really many workarounds for that. However, with Kachina, her ascension passives are all damage-centric, so you have no reason to level her up unless it's for survivability reasons, or to have her qualify for Imaginarium Theater. She is first and foremost a 4-piece Intercity bot, no matter what team you play her in, and her constellations have nothing to do with her passives, and you can utilize them all without needing to level her up. Leveling Kachina is quite literally only for her own damage, and has nothing to do with her supportive capabilities. Plus, Shilonen is obviously going to power creep Kachina, it's not rocket science, so naturally nobody's gonna want to farm an excessive amount of resources for her with her oh-so-finite resource of resin. I go more in-depth on this concept in my full Kachina guide, but the TLDR is that you don't have to level Kachina for her to be useful. Leave her at level 1, don't even farm boss materials for her, save all that for Mualani instead. If you're worried about survivability, do Kachina's trial stage so that you can get the materials to ascend her once without any need of resin investment and level her up to 40. You can also consider ascending her to collect your free standard wish, and consider leveling Kachina's flower to plus 20 so that she can stay alive. This character is free and everybody has her, so I think it's important to note that resin does not have to be spent on her in order for Kachina to be useful. I make this such a big point because there's so many new things for us to spend our resin on, so it's better that we don't spend it on units who aren't even asking for it. Another thing that Natlan has introduced to us all are new free-to-play craftable weapons, 3 of which being free choices. We'll go over those first since everybody has them, and evaluate whether these craftables are worth having your resin spent on them. I'm beginning with Ring of Yasha since it's a great free-to-play craftable from Mualani, who is currently on banners right now. It synergizes perfectly with our kit, and encourages building plenty of HP on her. It's an amazing budget choice, really. But we all know this. What's more interesting are the other characters who can use it. DPS Kokomi can actually utilize it if you use her jellyfish and go into your burst form and do normal attacks. Pretty cool if you're playing Farina Mono Hydro and Kokomi is also getting her damage buffed by both her and Kazuha's 4VV Res Tread. Nervalek can use it too, but it's a very superficial synergy. He can use it because the weapon has HP percent on it. The passive isn't that good for him because he does the main meat of his DPS output with his charge attacks. Also, even if Prototype Amber is similar, you get energy from it, which lets Nervalet generate more balls with his burst. The additional heals are small, but it's nice if you're playing Nervy Farina. So if you ask me, just stick to Prototype Amber Nervy if it's a budget Nerv you're after. I'll cover Footprint of the Rainbow next since Kachina is free, everybody has her, and everybody has the potential to use this weapon on her. To be honest, Favonius Lance is a much better pick on her, since most of us are all going to be playing Kachina as a super low level 4-piece Cinder City bot, but it's good for a more sub-DPS focused Kachina. Alright, cool, we all already know this. How about the polearm's other potential users? Well, mostly only Yunjin. Her burst's buff scales off of Yunjin's own defense, and her A4 also provides some additional buffing based on her own defense. Rainbow provides defense in its substat, and some extra defense in its refinable passive. My main issue here is that Yunjin, while she does love defense, also loves ER. I have an extremely hard time recommending this over Favonius, since in most of Yunjin's solo Geo teams, she's going to be facing extremely dire ER requirements. It doesn't help that none of her constellations provide Yunjin with ER. It's gonna cost you 240 plus ER to play Yunjin at any constellation comfortably within teams where she is the only Geo character, and Favonius Lance, especially at higher refinements, really helps out with this. So yes, this choice does work well with Yunjin, but keep in mind that her ER requirements are absolutely diabolical, so you're gonna have to get some really solid ER substats on her. Not to mention that you'll be missing out on white energy particles too. Yes, Yunjin does ascend with ER, but the fact that you still need a good amount of ER rolls afterwards should be very telling. For those curious, Yunjin gains 26.8% ER from ascending, and add that with 51.8%, a plus 20 ER sans, and you get 78.6% ER. Favonius brings you up into the 208.6% territory, which is more than enough for double Geo teams, but you still need more for solo Geo. I think you get the point by now. As for the craftable claymore, skill damage when a pyro reaction is triggered, awesome. Makes this an amazing budget option for Navia Bennett or Navia Xiangling teams. She loves the skill damage, it's the main meat of her kit, and the attack percent substat is highly appreciated as well. Tidal Shadow will be better for Navias that are getting healed more consistently, so essentially Navia Farina teams, especially if you're playing her with Xian Yun. Though I find that the Natlan Claymore is less conditional, as Navia Bennett teams are super common, and you may not own Xian Yun. It'll also be better than Tidal Shadow and Navia's best in slot free-to-play budget team. Navia, Cinder City, Kachina, Bennett, and Xiangling. I love this team, personally speaking. Lots of fun, give it a spin if you can. Refinements for it will also be very good. No other Claymore user really takes advantage of it as of now, unfortunately, but you can bet my left leg and right ear that our beloved handsome Kanich is most certainly going to use his Claymore as his best budget option. Navia also re-ran very recently in 4.8, so plenty of you should have her if you chose to pull. That covers all of the free handouts. Let's get into the other two. The craftable sword gives you a ton of def with its def percent main stat, and some extra def in its passive which benefits very nicely from extra refinements. Also, this is probably the most concise passive that we've had for a Genshin weapon in ages, or any Genshin equipment in general for that matter. I'm very happy about the existence of this pick, since Chiori was seriously lacking a good budget option. Sure, there was the 4-star Albedo weapon, but dude, that's been gone for years now, and I'm pretty sure there's people watching this video who have no idea what a Cinnabar Spindle even is. Well, boo, Spindle. She felt very R1 locked before, and I'm happy to see Chiori gain a competent option that everybody has access to via crafting. This choice also applies to Albedo, who was lacking even more than Chiori, honestly. At least Chiori has a great signature weapon, Albedo doesn't even have that. Spindle is indeed an amazing weapon option for him, but how many people honestly still have that anymore? This craftable finally gives the guy something to work with that's actually permanently in the game, and better yet, it's free. Great stuff. I'm sure it'll also be useful for some Natlan character in the future, seeing as the previous 3 weapons have the very clear intended users of Mualani for Yasha, Kachina for Rainbow, even if it isn't her actual best in slot in practice, funnily enough, and Earthshaker for Kenichi in the future, mostly assuming this since he's coming later this patch. Possibly Shilonen, but I can't say anything for certain right now. This bow is a bit of a weird one. I will point out that no, you don't need Natlan characters in your party for this to work. It says 3 Natlan characters, or 3 characters of different elemental types from the wearer, but you can also choose to ignore the passive and use it as an attack percent stick as well. Though with refinements, the passive does get a little better. In any case, I don't really think this is worth your billets, as there's no definitive users for it as of now. Fischl could technically use it if you're playing her outside of Aggravate, something like a Nervalette team where she's the only Electro, so the 3 other teammates are non-Electro and she can use the passive. Child can also use it since he's the only Hydro in International. Bennett and Shangling are both Pyro, but repeated elemental types are fine as long as they're not the same elemental type as the equipper of his bow. Either way, a bit of a jank weapon. I think out of this entire batch of new craftables, the bow is easily the worst one. I'm sure there'll eventually be a user of it in the future, but as of now, I digress. To be honest, I think this is one of the better batches of craftables that we've gotten. If you were to ask me, I personally think that the Ring of Yasha and Earthshaker are the most worth your time in Resin on the whole, but since I've went over every potential user of each weapon, you can decide for yourself whether you'd like to go farm up these weapons and use them over your current option of choice on said units. Free-to-plays, you're eating good with this one. Naturally, a new region equals new domains, new artifacts, new talents, etc. The nice thing is that the Natlan artifact sets are both very Natlan-centric, so if you're not playing Mualani, then there's no real need to chase after Obsidian Codex, since no other characters will have Night Soul. The real kicker is the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City. When it comes to Kachina, the way I manage it is that she has a plus 20 ER stance to have her burst up consistently, then the rest of her cinder pieces are plus 0 artifacts with completely random and irrelevant main stats. If you need better survivability, you can consider bringing her flower up to plus 20 as well, otherwise there's no need. This way, you can gain access to the 1000 EM Kazuha quality buff on Kachina with literally minimal resin investment, and you can make the ER stands an off-piece as the rest of the 4-piece doesn't really matter in order for Kachina to do her thing. You can save a lot of resin in this way. Then, I'll list off all of the other potential users of 4-piece Cinder City, so that you can decide whether the set is worth farming if you play any of these characters in any specific teams. Do note that because none of these characters have access to Night Soul, as they are not from Natlan, every single character that is not Kachina will not be able to trigger the full 40% buff. Any other character will only be providing a 12% damage bonus percent buff. I'd say that considering the amount of use cases that it has across so many different teams, it's honestly a very safe and resin efficient set to farm. Candice, Toma, Nihida, Kirara, Chevris, Charlotte, Layla, Goro, Lisa, Diona, Shinyan, Zhongli, Kokomi, Mona, Bennett. I most certainly missed out somebody since this set is so universal and has so many potential users, but I tried to group up as many characters as I could think of. Everybody here can use it, whether it be their best in slot, an alternative, or a downgrade over their original sets. Think of it like a modern-day noblesse, a noble set that can buff teams that are also HP scaling. For example, Kachina being able to provide 4-piece Intercity's buff to Nervalette teams. As for the new artifact crafting mechanic, because it requires so many leveled artifacts in order to craft one new one, don't indulge into it just yet. Whoever said during the dev livestream that they're going to be handing out free elixirs to craft unique artifacts of your choice, and we're probably going to get that mail around Kenichi's banner. So if you're wanting a good set for your Mualani, keep farming the artifacts traditionally for now, as when the time comes where we get the elixirs for free, you may not even need to craft an on-set double crit Hydro % goblet anymore if you get lucky. It's a big waste of fodder to use this machine before we get our freebies, and since we can only craft one per patch, might as well wait until later during this patch when we get the materials for free. When it comes to leveling your talents and farming the new talent book domains, ignore all of Kachina's talents to save yourself some resin if you're running her as a 4-piece Cinder City bot. No reason to go out of your way to chase talent books for a character who will be replaced very soon by Leopard Lady Shilonen. In contrast, Mualani does want her talents leveled, so save that resin and spend it all on her talents instead, since they're a lot more meaningful. Friendly reminder to anybody that regularly buys the Welcome Moon and doesn't spend their Genesis crystals, you can buy a decent chunk of selectable talent materials in the gift shop. We will most likely get new weekly bosses within Natlan, but for now, we have all the older ones to focus on, as the first batch of new units in a region always use older weekly bosses. I'd place your main focus on the Arlecchino boss and the Whale boss, especially because Mualani uses the whale materials. I also believe that Arlecchino's materials are going to come in handy in the future. Plus, you can never collect too many dream solvents for future weeklies. I'd also even collect a few materials here and there from Apep and Scaramouche. This is because sometimes during a version, characters will use older talent materials even when the brand new weekly bosses are out. Think about Natlan, who released during 2.7, but uses H-Dehaz materials despite the Raiden boss fight having been added a patch prior to Natlan coming out. Definitely don't skip the Fontaine bosses though. When it comes to basic materials, if you're AR 60, Mora should be covered. If you're any AR below that, Mora is indeed not covered. To get out of his poverty predicament, don't sleep on buying Mora every week with realm currency in the teapot. And if your teapot isn't at a stage where you can buy materials and an extra fragile per week due to realm currency yet, then go and fix up your teapot right now. You can also spam random furniture all over the place if you only want the benefits of having a lot of furniture and don't care much for actually decorating your teapot. Extra resin and XP can also be bought in the teapot. Do your bounties. It's a nice little extra bit of Mora every week, which adds up over time. Also, you get reputation for doing this, so that's 2 birds with 1 stone. Make sure to not ignore your events and quests either, as doing a bunch of those in a row will most certainly give you a large sum of Mora and XP books. Also, completely buy out your early game shops if you haven't already, so that you can yield out a crap ton of extra Mora. Even if you can't comfortably clear the Spiral Abyss or Imaginarium Theater, at least attempt it every reset, as you still get a considerable amount of character XP and valuable Mora. There's no resin required to yield said rewards. Keeping on top of all of these things should make maintaining a steady amount of basic fundamental resources far easier, not to mention that you save a lot of resin that can instead then be spent on everything else that we've already discussed. Natlan has definitely added a ton of amazing and high-value artifacts, weapons, and bosses into the game, and it can always be overwhelming to decide how you want to spend your resin. My advice is to build teams. Pick a team, then focus on building it up and getting all the necessary levels, talents, artifacts, weapons, etc. That way you're focusing on only 4 characters at a time. I personally much prefer building character by character since it avoids weapon sharing from ever being a thing on my account, but that process doesn't cut it for everyone. All in all, we have 2 new characters as of making this video, with only one of which needing some real substantial resin investment, so things should be easy to manage for now. But make sure to take your time, and most importantly, have fun with the new region. Hopefully this video was able to tell you how to spend your resin most efficiently with the new region of Natlan now being out. This has been Juice, signing out, and my urge to return to the unfinished Reverie domain is strong. I still don't have a double crit Emily, favorite man.